Welcome to Pluribus Unum, Ending Homelessness Together. My name is David Gruber. I am the Development and Communications Director at the Metro Dallas Homeless Alliance. That means that I don't do any of the real work over here. That is done by my colleagues. I have the honor of telling you all about that work, communications, and then demanding that you pay for it, development. Incidentally, I am much better in person. So, if you like what you watch and hear here, you can invite me to speak through the contact info on that first slide. I'll just leave that there for a second for you to see. So imagine we could end homelessness, not just help individuals, not just manage homelessness. Imagine we could eradicate it. Imagine we could make this intractable social ill a thing of the past. Now you might say, David, that's a fantasy. Think again. There are times in our history, fairly recently in fact, that had I told you we would eradicate slavery, segregation, Indian removal, or institutional anti-Semitism, you might think me a fabulist, yet here we are. So what do we mean? We do not mean no one ever becomes homeless. We do mean homelessness rarely happens. When it does, it is brief, and it never happens to that person again. It is important to remember that the modern homelessness crisis that we see today is just 40 years old. Two things happened in the mid to late 1970s that scholars agree caused this crisis, and that is the elimination of single resident occupancies and the shutting down of state mental hospitals. For a larger exposition of that, you can consult the excellent book, Housing First, by Dr. Sam Tsimbaris and his partners. In the first chapter, they go through that in detail. So how are we doing in Dallas? Well, we're going in the wrong direction, as you can see. We established a baseline in our annual homeless counts in 2016-2017 of around 3,800 people. And we are now at 4,538. And the more concerning part is the unsheltered numbers have gone up, basically doubled from 739 to 1452. So how do we reverse this trend? How do we end homelessness? Well, only one thing ends homelessness. This is the National Strategic Plan to End Homelessness. The first word in its name is a dead giveaway, home. And that second word is really important though too. We'll get back to it. So we house the folks who are experiencing homelessness. For some folks, that is all that is needed. For some other folks, we need to throw in a few services to assist them. However, it is important to emphasize that research and common sense align in this case. If someone does not have a home, house them, and they are no longer homeless. That's the beauty of homelessness. Okay, that sounds weird. Let's try that again. That's the beauty of ending homelessness. It may be hard, but it's not at all complicated. There are problems in our society that we don't know how to solve. There are problems in our society that demand complex solutions. There are problems in our society that demand huge and sweeping change. Fortunately, homelessness is not one of those problems. We know exactly what to do. We know how to do it. We have done it for numerous people. Now here's just one very recent example from this last summer. I'm going to simplify it a little for the purposes of this presentation, but only a little. We decided to challenge ourselves, our providers, and our community to house 100 homeless veterans in 100 days. We didn't end up housing 100 veterans in 100 days. Instead, we housed 140 veterans in 100 days. How did we do it? Let's walk through the steps we took, one by one. So the VA verified their veteran status. DHA, the Dallas Housing Authority, gave them housing vouchers. Step 3, VA and DHA helped them find and rent apartments with those vouchers. Step 4, there is no step 4. It really is that simple. So let's back up a little. One of the most common questions we get is this one. Why are they homeless? And many times when people are asking that question, what they're really also asking is, yikes, could I ever become homeless? So let's first talk about why they're not homeless. Let's talk about what is not the cause of homelessness. So it's not poverty. Of the 375,000 people living in poverty in Dallas County, only about 4,000 are homeless. That's like 1%. So it's not poverty. It's not a lack of affordable housing. In the United States, there are 8.3 million households that are defined as having worst case housing needs. That's households, not persons. While only 568,000 persons are homeless. Now we'll get back to that one because the crisis was arguably brought on partially by the disappearance of affordable housing, and the crisis remains closely connected to the affordable housing crisis. Still, it's not a lack of affordable housing. It's not addiction or substance abuse. So reliable studies show that 40 million Americans are addicts, another 80 million are risky users, and we do not have 120 million Americans who are or are at risk of becoming homeless. It's not mental illness. 48 million American adults experience mental illness every year, and we do not have 48 million American adults who are or are at risk of becoming homeless. It's not lack of religion or faith. Denmark, for instance, has extremely low levels of religious belief. However, the levels of poverty and want in Denmark are markedly lower than in the United States. Now, it's hard to argue with any of these statements, and we're not arguing with them. Poverty is bad for society. There is not enough affordable housing. Substance abuse causes problems. Don't do drugs, kids. Just say no. And folks with mental illness need help. And faith has positive, wonderful influences in many people's lives. But that still doesn't help us answer the most important question. Why are they homeless? Could I ever become homeless? So the answer is social network breakdown. Most of us will never become homeless because we would lean on our network of social connections. Our families, friends, and social groups would be there for us to call on. And homelessness occurs when this network of social connections breaks down, or was poor to start with, and can no longer be activated. Now, think of yourself as a trapeze artist. There are 3 nets that catch each one of us from falling into homelessness: our income, our assets, and our social network. Most of us have some type of income coming in with which we pay our mortgage or rent. Now, if that went away, we could still tap our assets, be they savings, investments, retirement plans, etc. Even if we depleted those, most of us would be able to rely on our family, our friends, members of the house of worship we belong to, etc. And homelessness is the result of falling through that final net. So the solution addresses the problem. That's why it's so important to first of all say what it's not about, because if you think it's about one of those things, you will try to apply the wrong solution. When you understand what the real problem is, you can apply a solution that addresses that problem. And the way we solve this problem is to put in place a homeless response system. that steps into the gap created by the social network breakdown and ideally helps rebuild it too. And so a primary focus of the 2009 Hearth Act, of Opening Doors, the original National Strategic Plan to End Homelessness, as well as its recent successor that I showed you before, Home Together, is on developing an effective and unified homeless response system in every community. Unified is the key word. Research shows that we can't end homelessness if each provider just does their own thing. We can only end homelessness if we work together as a system. The essence of the system is really quite simple. We must indeed all hang together, or assuredly we shall all hang separately. These two slides, this one and the next one, might be the most important ones in the entire presentation. So if you want the right answer, you must ask the right question. In the bad old days, they would ask, will this person be successful in our program? So somebody would approach program X, and that's the question they would ask. Now, most homeless folks could care less about your program. They just don't want to be homeless. Nowadays, what we ask, the right question to ask, is what solutions, notice, not programs, what solutions best match the needs of this person and will end their homelessness quickly and permanently. This is a fundamental shift from a program-centered environment to a person-centered system. What homeless folks need is a solution. Sometimes that will be in the form of a program, but sometimes it will not. Almost the same slide, but you'll see it's slightly different. If you want the right answer, it matters who asks the question. So in the bad old days, every program would ask separately, will this person be successful in our program? And today, everyone working together as a system, we ask what solutions best match the needs of this person and will end their homelessness quickly and permanently. Now, just to clarify, it could be the exact same individual. So say an intake person or a case manager who could ask on behalf of a specific program in the bad old days, will you be successful in our program? And it could be that very same individual now asking that on behalf of the system, what solutions best match the needs of this person and will end their homelessness quickly and permanently. The focus of MDHA's work, in accordance with its charge by the US government, is, as it says here, on developing an effective and unified homeless response system for Dallas and Collin Counties. So prior to 2009, the federal government expected organizations like ours to do four things: facilitate grant funding for HUD-funded homeless services programs. Those are referred to as the Continuum of Care, or COC grants. They total about $16.5 to $17.5 million annually. Administer the Homeless Management Information System, or HMIS, that drives improvement of federally funded homeless services programs, which currently serve about 17,000 people. Maintain a count of the persons experiencing homelessness, so that's the demand side of the equation, and maintain an inventory count of housing and shelter beds for the homeless and formerly homeless. That's the supply side. And from 2009, under the Hearth Act, the federal government expects organizations like ours to continue doing all of that, plus what you see here: develop and quarterback an effective, unified homeless response system where all homeless services programs work together to make homelessness rare, brief, and non-recurring. So this is an infographic that was developed by our counterpart in Kansas City in 2014. It still describes what we do in Dallas in 2020, because again, the federal government, under the Hearth Act of 2009, expects all communities to build such a system. It is built on 4 pillars that are represented in this infographic, and we'll go through them one by one. Number one is diversion. Now, this might seem a little counterintuitive, but the first thing we would like to do is ideally not even get you into the system. Homelessness is not homogeneous. It's on a continuum, just like we are not homogeneous. We are heterogeneous. As Ian DeYoung of OrdCode often says, if you've seen one homeless person, well, you've seen one homeless person. Again, they're as heterogeneous as you and I. And many of those who come to seek our help have the capacity to self-resolve with the help of some mainstream resources or light touch one-time assistance. Let's give an example of what that might look like. So if somebody shows up at a shelter, let's just take Austin Street Center as an example. In the bad old days, we would just say, hey, come on in, and for as much time as you want. And we won't talk about housing because, who needs that? And nowadays, before a person even enters, they'll attempt to divert that person from the system. So a discussion might go like this. What happened? What brings you to the shelter today? Well, I was just evicted. Okay, well, sorry to hear that. Do you have any family in the area? Why, yes, my mom lives in Dallas. Okay, so what's the situation with mom? Why didn't you call mom? Well, we're not speaking. What happened? Well, we had a fight about 3 years ago. What was the fight about? I don't really remember. Were you homeless at the time? Oh, well, no, I was not. If we called her up and said, hey, he's now homeless, he's here at the shelter, what would she say? Well, she'd say, come on over and stay with me. Let's make the phone call. And so with that, by the way, that doesn't really cost real money. I mean, obviously that person is earning money for the time they're spending with the person who shows up at the shelter. But through that, we have now diverted that person from the homeless response system. And we provided them with a solution. Again, what solutions do you need to end your homelessness quickly and permanently? So that's just one example of one of the most important pillars that seems a little counterintuitive because it's basically about diverting you from the system. Okay, so let's say we could not divert you. So you're coming into the system, mom is not in the picture, she doesn't live in Dallas, or, that's just not an option. There's nobody really you can stay with. So the system itself does something which is technically called coordinated assessment. So we assess, we prioritize, and we place. Now the system has only one entry point. This is a virtual entry point. So regardless of where you show up, that entry point is. That's part of what's called, by the way, a no wrong door policy. So we don't say, hey, we can't help you. We get you to the place you need to be to get the help. And no placements are made in any program without going through this process. And in this process, we assess you objectively, uniformly, with an evidence-based tool. We prioritize you for service based on the level of your vulnerability and according to your specific needs. And then all clients go onto a unified housing priority list and are housed based on their priority, status, and specific needs. And we talked about no wrong door. There's another concept we talk about of no side doors. So again, in the bad old days, we would house people randomly. It would be like a first come, first serve. It would be, hey, my case manager has a hookup with somebody else. We eliminate all of that, and everybody goes through this process, and they are all housed based on these very objective criteria. This is another infographic that represents the coordinated assessment system specifically, so not the whole response system. And you can see on the top, these are the various places people might come to when they approach us for help, when they approach the system. Various methods of communication on top of that. They may walk in, they may call. We have a homeless helpline that they can call, and they get routed to different nodes according to their specific needs and get into this process. And then you have the solutions on the bottom, so the various types of solutions that can be provided to them, from diversion all the way to permanent supportive housing. Now, very, very important, the third pillar is all roads lead to housing. So the entire system is oriented towards housing. There is a sense of urgency in getting everyone, and first and foremost, those who are high on the housing priority list, into housing as soon as possible with as few barriers as possible. And in the meantime, individuals who need it are offered temporary shelter with the constant, ever-present expectation that they be moved into housing as soon as possible. So let's talk about what that looks like. So again, let's pick up with our gentleman who arrived, or let's say it's you. You arrived at the at Austin Street Center. Okay, we've asked the questions about, is your mom in town? Do you have family? Is there somewhere you can stay? And we've kind of exhausted that part of it. So, we definitely want you to be safe. So come on into shelter tonight. But as we bring you in, we already are talking about housing. So we say, you know what? Tomorrow morning, Susie's going to be here because I'm your shift manager now. And, Susie's on the morning shift. She's like the best case manager that you will have ever met. And she is going to talk to you about your housing plan. What's a housing plan? Well, we'll talk about that tomorrow, but just start thinking about what your housing plan is. So you're already primed as you go in. Well, oh boy, I got to think about my housing plan. And in the morning, before you even meet Susie, you're getting your food. The guy who's serving your food says, hey, how are you? Haven't seen you here before. My name's Joe. What's your name? Hey, what's your housing plan? So you're already, wow, okay, this housing plan thing is important. I got to think about that. And then you talk to your case manager about your housing. You develop a housing plan so you can get out and as soon as possible into housing. Sometimes in some shelters, folks will even wear t-shirts that say, what's your housing plan? So again, it's that constant presence, that constant sense of urgency that we want to get you out of here as soon as possible and into housing. Here's a bulletin board they used to use at Austin Street Center, which was really cool. They got a different version of it today. And this really is helpful because at the end of the day, these are the folks that have the greatest credibility. They're not working for Austin Street Center. They're not working for MDHA. They're not earning a paycheck to tell you anything. You might even recognize them if you're homeless, and you might recognize these people like, wow, I remember that person. He was homeless at the same time I was, and now he's in housing. Wow, I got to figure out how to get myself into housing too. What's my housing plan? Tell me more about what I can do. And then the final fourth pillar is transparency. You see the cloud, right? So it's one of those technological clouds, because that's where data systems are normally today. So every program that serves the homeless needs to report in real time into one central HMIS system. Like we said, HMIS stands for Homeless Management Information System. That is managed by MDHA, and there can be no exceptions barring issues of safety. So intimate partner violence, domestic violence, shelters and programs do not enter data into that one system. They enter it into slightly different systems to protect the safety and security of those who are being helped by those programs. This is the only way. So only if all of these programs enter all of the data, it's the only way we can know if and how much progress we are truly making as a community. And more importantly, it's the only way we can improve and self-correct where we're not. Now, as of late 2014, there were 0% of shelter beds in the system, and now we're almost at 86%. So we've made huge strides in this area of transparency. Now, I might talk about pillars, might talk about systems, a lot of fancy words. What we also always need to remember is that it is the case managers. They are usually the lowest paid, hardest working, and they work hand in glove with the folks who are experiencing homelessness, and they assist every client at every step of the housing process until the key is in the door. So we always want to remember that really they're doing the work on the ground. So what problems will this not solve? What problems will the homeless response system not be able to solve? Well, these might sound familiar. We talked about them beforehand. Poverty, lack of affordable housing, substance abuse, mental illness. It's important to remember what the homeless response system can do and what it cannot. Now, sometimes people say to me, David, that's really quite unkind. Why do you not want to solve those problems? And my answer is I'd love to, but I can't do it because this is the money that we're looking at. We got the entire federal budget that is $4.4 trillion. And remember what COC stands for, Continuum of Care. That is the main program that helps house homeless folks. And that's 2.3 billion, which is 1/1900th or 0.05% of the federal budget. And we can end homelessness with that, but we can't end all those other problems with such a tiny amount of money. Now, this is symptomatic. When I say this, I mean the amount of money we devote to it. This is symptomatic of our general approach. So consider just affordable housing. So there are 30 units of affordable housing available for every 100 very low income people. Only 1 in 4 people who qualify for housing assistance actually receive it, and 8.3 million very low income people / households paid more than 50% of their income for rent. So that's just that area of housing. We're talking about a huge area of need. Now, we could have a different system in this country rather than primarily relying on our social networks. There is one very simple thing we could do which would transform our work entirely, as well as lift many people not only out of homelessness, but out of poverty too. So right now, being eligible for a housing voucher is not enough. We cap the number of housing vouchers, and so only 20 to 25% of those eligible can get them. So just remove the cap, and as long as someone is eligible, give them a housing voucher. Our Veterans Housing Challenge showed proof of concept in this sense very recently. Instead of being caught by the social network net, we would have an actual safety net to catch folks from falling into abject poverty and homelessness due to housing costs. So why have we not ended homelessness yet? For all veterans, for that matter, for all children, for that matter, for all families, for that matter, period. Well, this is the answer. It's just not a priority. This is from the father of our former vice president. He says, "Don't tell me what you value. Show me your budget, and I'll tell you what you value." We just don't value ending homelessness and poverty as much as we value other things. We spend money on what we value. We could spend money on housing. We could make sure, again, that every single person eligible for a housing voucher got one. We don't do that. So what do we value? What do we spend money on that we value? Well, we definitely value this. This is an aircraft carrier. As you can see, it's the most modern one in service, the CVN-78. I like the number of people it holds because you could end homelessness in Dallas in one fell swoop by just housing all the homeless folks in there. So how much does this cost? Don't Google. Think about it for a second. Costs $13.5 billion. And again, ending homelessness, annually we spend $2.3 billion. So we spend on one aircraft carrier about 7 times what we spend annually on ending homelessness in the entire country. And how many of these do we have? How many aircraft carriers? Well, we have 11. How many does the rest of the world have? They have 11. Now, before the Gerald Ford, which is the one in the picture, became operational, for a very short time, in mid-2017, we only had 10 aircraft carriers. What a scary time that was. So, you know what else is a priority, though? Let's bring it a little closer to home. Football stadiums. Do you recognize this one? It's the Allen ISD's football stadium. Now, do you know how much this costs? Again, don't Google it. Just take a guess. I'll give you a second. Here's how much it costs. $60 million. Now remember, of that $2.3 billion, Dallas and Collin Counties get about $16.5–17.5 million. So that's the comparison. That's how much we spend on ending homelessness. That's how much we spend on one football stadium. And it's not even an apples to apples comparison, because that $17.5 million is for all of Dallas and Collin County, not just one city called Allen. And it's federal money. It's not municipal money. So after all of that, why am I hopeful? Here's why. Winston Churchill once said, the Americans will always do the right thing after they've exhausted all the alternatives. Okay, there's a problem with the slide, I know. That's not Winston Churchill. Well, there's another problem, because Winston Churchill never said that. This is actually Abba Eban. And he once said, men and nations behave wisely when they have exhausted all other resources. That seems to be the source for the false Winston Churchill saying. So we will do the right thing once we've exhausted all other resources. Eventually, just like we did with slavery, segregation, women's suffrage, and institutional anti-Semitism. So what can you do to get us there a little quicker? Support your local homeless response system. So we do what works, not what we hope will work or what we think will work. Good intentions cannot substitute for best practices. Ask us who is doing which and use some common sense too. You can help the homeless build networks. Establish a Room in the Inn program at your house of worship, or end one person's homelessness at your house of worship. Advocate for more housing from all sources, government and non-government, and in your neighborhood, because housing the homeless doesn't lower property rates and it doesn't increase crime. Those are myths. It's just not true. And advocate for a different system, one where we really have a real safety net that helps folks not only escape homelessness, but poverty too. I know we can do this, because again, though it may be hard, it's really not that complicated. Just ask Winnie the Pooh and Piglet. I've been thinking, said Pooh. You have a house, Piglet, and I have a house, and they are very good houses. And Christopher Robin has a house, and Owl, and Kanga, and Rabbit have houses. And even Rabbit's friends and relations have houses or somethings. But poor Eeyore has nothing. So what I've been thinking is, let's build him a house. That, said Piglet, is a grand idea.